Welcome to Simplify Science Selects Lecture 12.2, The Circle of Life. Our quote is from Albert Einstein. Our task must be to free ourselves by widening our circle of compassion, to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature and its beauty. Our learning goals: convert between a food web and food pyramid, demonstrate the movement of energy through an ecosystem, and discuss the evolutionary advantages of position. What we already know: a variety of organisms in an ecosystem, interactions determine a lot of the outcomes, and it's a complicated system of interactions between. We learned in the lab that a small number of top-tier consumers exist with a large number of low-level producers. Mass and energy move through a system, and toxins can biomagnify. What does it mean to be a producer? Producers are also known as autotrophs. This comes from the Greek auto, which means self, and troph, meaning food. Their energy comes from a source that isn't alive. Consumers are known as heterotrophs, from the Greek hetero, different, and troph, meaning feeding. Their energy comes from a source that is alive. Well, at least it was alive until they eat it. So that means that consumers get their energy from biotic sources and producers get their energy from abiotic sources. This is commonly the sun for producers, but it could be different chemicals, among other things. Let's look at a very simple food chain. The sun is radiating energy in the form of light. Then the energy goes from the sun to the grass. The energy from the light is absorbed by the grass and it is used to produce sugars. So the grass is the producer because it's getting its energy from an abiotic source, the sun. Then the grasshopper. The energy in the grass can be used by the grasshopper after it is consumed. And the grasshopper is a consumer because it gets its energy from a biotic source, the grass. So that makes our simple food chain. We draw the first creature and arrow the second creature, because the arrow represents the energy moving from the producer into the consumer. But once the energy is in the grasshopper, then what happens? Well, the grasshopper uses that energy, whether he's jumping around, flying around, going to find new food, trying to maintain homeostasis, having little baby grasshoppers, those little nymphs, finding a mate and mating, all these different things that grasshoppers use energy in the course of their lives. But energy also goes to higher level consumers, whether a snake or a praying mantis, or even a human. Consumer certainly gets energy from biotic sources. So primary consumers consume producers, but secondary consumers can consume other primary consumers. But the energy doesn't stop there. There's a third level, tertiary. We use the word tertiary because thirdary sounds like a dumb word. So a tertiary consumer can eat a secondary consumer. So if we put all that together, we can make a food chain that follows the energy. So in this case, the energy in the corn, which is a producer, goes to the locust, a primary consumer. The energy in the locust goes to the lizard, a secondary consumer. The energy in the lizard goes to the snake, a tertiary consumer. But wait a minute. In our first example, we went from grass to grasshopper to snake to hawk. In our second example, we went from maize to locust to lizard to snake. So is the snake a secondary consumer or a tertiary consumer? Well, the status of secondary tertiary depends on the food chain. The snake isn't locked into being one or the other. It just depends on the sequence of events. It could be either. Now, there are some organisms that are called apex predators. That means that they'll never be in the middle of the food chain. They'll always be at the end. Nothing consumes them. Examples of apex predators are lions. Nothing out there hunts lions. Nothing hunts sharks. At least not a large great white like this. Nothing out there is hunting alligators or crocodiles. Humans are apex predators. Now, does that mean that none of these animals ever die and are consumed by another animal or ever killed by one or competition? Yeah, sure, things happen. But we're just saying that the typical events, nothing out there is a skilled hunter of these. These are the top of the food chain. But what happens to the energy that's in the things at the top of the food chain? The energy isn't stuck in the top level consumers or any creature, really. Whenever it dies, if it's not consumed by something else, a decomposer is another creature. It returns the energy back to the ecosystem. Decomposers like earth mushrooms, roly-polies, different kinds of bacteria. All these things break down the remaining energy that's left in an organism, return it to the food chain. Here's a developing question. What does the arrow itself represent? Well, the arrow itself represents the energy that's moving from one creature to the other. Okay, a proficient question. See if you can write a food chain that has a producer, 3 consumers, and a decomposer. Well, obviously answers will vary here. Just make sure you have a primary consumer, a secondary consumer, and a tertiary consumer, as well as a decomposer to wrap it all up. A mastery question. Are decomposers a type of producer or a type of consumer? Or I guess what I'm saying, are decomposers an autotroph or a heterotroph? Do mushrooms make food or do they eat food? The point we're trying to make is that decomposers are more a type of consumer, really, because they get their energy from biotic sources. Now, they're not a predator. They don't hunt those things. That's why they have their own class called decomposer. Now, a food web, if you interconnect multiple food chains, you make a food web. So a food web is a little bit more complicated. So if you look at all these arrows all over the place, many food chains can be pulled out of a single food web. So if we look, we could go here from, okay, I guess let's start with this type of grass right here. And let's say that this grass here in the middle is eaten by the grasshopper. And then that grasshopper is eaten, let's see, by the wildebeest. And then the wildebeest is eaten by this cheetah. So then our food chain would be grass to grasshopper to wildebeest to cheetah. You can see there's many different paths it could take. And you can see, I guess it looks a little bit confusing. The arrow from the grasshopper is going through the wildebeest, so the wildebeest isn't actually eating it. So that food chain isn't actually accurate. Let's try another one. So let's go, let's start with the left grass, this star grass. And then it looks like it can be consumed. The arrow goes to this harvester ant. And then that looks like that arrow goes to this aardvark. And the aardvark can be consumed by the hyena. So star grass to harvester ant, aardvark to hyena. Now, herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, these all describe optimal and typical diets, but they're not strict rules. There's many exceptions. We can see the picture of this deer eating what looks to be a rabbit, I think. Living things will do what they can to stay alive. If an herbivore is low on food, it's not going to pass up on a potential sort of energy just because it's not its preferred diet. So we're looking at common. Now we have primary, secondary, tertiary. Why not any of these other higher levels like quaternary, quinary, centenary, septenary, octenary? How many levels are there? Why don't we keep seeing more and more and more? The reason is not all of the energy gets passed up. Only 10% of the energy contained in the producers, for example, makes it into the primary consumers. The rest of the energy was lost to heat. They use up the energy to move. They use the energy to eat. They use the energy to maintain homeostasis, escape predators, to reproduce, post updates to Twitter. That might only be one species, actually. But the point is that the energy gets used up so that not all the energy is available to the next level. And 10% is true going up each one. So if all the energy available, if we consider just the producers, we call it 100% of the total energy available to producers level, of that amount of energy, only 10% of that energy is going to be found inside of the primary consumers. And then if we look at the secondary consumers, they only have 1% of the energy that the producers had. And the third level, the tertiary, only have 0.1% of what the producers had. So you can see that there'd be a problem. That if you tried to go to a fourth level, that they'd only have 0.01% or 0.001%. We'd run out of the energy that'd be available. What makes up the largest percent of energy in an ecosystem? A developing level question. Well, producers. Producers are at the bottom of that food pyramid because of the amount of energy available to them. What's the longest food chain present in this food web? A proficient question. I count 6, a couple different routes. Mastery question. How is this energy pyramid possible? See, the strange thing there is that that bottom level should be really large, but it isn't. This is possible because the amount of energy available at any one time by phytoplankton for the zooplankton to eat, and then the herring eats them, and the sea lion eats those. Phytoplankton reproduce amazingly fast, so there might not be much energy at one time, but as they're consumed by zooplankton, the phytoplankton replenish themselves very quickly.